Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to try and finish up the dashboard section. There's a couple more pieces that we need to do, and so we'll try and knock that out, and then we can move on to styling, which will make this look a whole lot better. So let's get going. So here in the right we have our mockups, and on this tab is our current view of the app. So the pieces we have are the days, the activities, the average, the best streak, and what we're missing is this most consistent and focus on section, and then this quote at the bottom. So let's start with this consistency thing, and I think we're going to use another SQL thing because in our current way of doing things, in Active Record, it works, but it is not great. So I'd rather have some SQL stuff than, do this kind of count type thing, which works, but not very elegant. So what we want to do is I'm going to define this consistent thing as which ones you've done the most. So let's just do a raw count of all the fields. So we just look at our records real quick. And we're on user@example.com, which should be user 4. We can look at that real quick. User.find 4. Okay, and it is user@example.com. So let's look at the records for this user. And let's spell where correctly. So here's this user's records. So what we want to do is we want to take all these columns that are true and false, and we want to count them. So for example, for this physical column, this first one with values, true, false, we have one value here that's true, one value here. So there would be 2 of these. In the mental column, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if it was just between these 2 columns, the mental one would be your most consistent. The physical one would be the one that you're least consistent. In just using this basic count, and we can get into more sophisticated or fancier logic later, but for now let's just go with which one have you done the most, which one have you done the least. So they're the records. What I'm going to do here is I think I'm going to make a table summing up each of these attributes. So I'm going to sum the physical attribute, give it an alias, and when we sum all these up, then we'll pull off the one that has the most and the least. Okay, so we got all those, and let's just see what that is. Syntax error at or near. Okay, we don't need a comma after this one. Function sum boolean. Okay, we cannot sum a boolean, so let's make these into ints. Cast them into ints so they can be counted. Okay, so now we have our raw counts. So for this user, the mental category is ahead with 5. Physical is the least with 2. We're also tied with financial here, and so we could maybe do some type of ordering based on the last one, but for now, being tied on this is okay. We'll just pick one. And so what I want to do is I want to take this table and I want to feed it into another query. So I'm going to use another common table expression. So I'm going to say with, we're going to call this table sums, as, and then we're going to put this entire thing inside of here. So we're going to do this kind of pre-calculation, and then we're going to select from it. Let's move this down. So we're going to select from, what do we call this? Sums. So what are we going to take out of here? So this is probably not the best way to do this, but what I want is, I want obviously the one that is the biggest and the one that is the smallest. And so one way to do this is there's this function in Postgres called greatest and least, and you can pass in all of our values and it will give you the biggest one. So for example, if I do like greatest, select greatest of 1, 5, or whatever, 10, 123. Gives me 123 obviously. And least does the same thing, except the opposite. The problem is that I don't know what this value is. Like what I want is I want to be able to name this as well. And maybe if you are watching this and you know a good way to do this, then leave me a comment, because I don't think this is going to turn out very elegant, but it will work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a case statement, and I'm going to take the greatest. So I'm going to say, give me the biggest of all these things. And and then based on the result, I'm going to map it to what I want it to say. There's probably a better way to do this, but I cannot think of it at the moment. Let's keep these consistent. End as, let's call this best. So let's just run that real quick. Okay, syntax error. Oh, there's no commas after case statements. Okay, so it says that our best is mental, which is what we confirmed when we ran this up here. Mental or financials are best. And so basically let's do the same thing, but for the least. So just copy this again, call this worst, and then instead of using greatest here, we'll just use least. So now when we select this, it does not work because we've put a comma here, which we don't need. Okay, so now it tells us our best is mental, worst is physical. Again, probably a better way to do this, but it's what we got. Okay, so now let's go back over to our code and let's put that in. So let's open our aggregation service. Let's open the test. Let's make a new function. Let's call it a consistency. Let's take any user and let's make our SQL here doc. I always forget the format for this. And then what we want to do is we want to take this user ID, which we need to be dynamic. So let's go ahead and give that a symbol for where we want to sub that in. And let's come up here and grab our standardization and our execution, as well as our row logic. Sure, why not? You shouldn't copy paste, but I'm going to do it almost every time and be bitten by it almost every time. Okay, so this is our basic structure. We've got our query, and this function needs to be class method, and also it needs to be not private. So I have it below this private modifier, so that means we won't be able to access it from outside the class. So let's go ahead and move that up. And so we've got our SQL query, which is long. Below that, we're going to sanitize the output. We're going to execute the query, and then we're going to check how many rows we have and do stuff with it. So we'll do stuff here. We'll return stuff here based on whatever we want to do. Okay, so let's go over to our console and reload to get those changes. Let's call the service to see what we get back. So we get 2 attributes. Do we have an alias in our returns? As worst. So we're calling this thing best and worst, but I don't see that coming back. So let's not return the rows, let's just return the result. So we're just going to return the result and see what that is. So reload and run again. Okay, so it does give our columns back. The rows obviously don't have the column names. So our column names are right here. That's okay. So the first value that we saw, so let's go ahead and reload, run it again. So we have the best is first, and then the second one is the worst. So let's go ahead and return best is the first attribute, and worst is the second. And then let's just return nil for now for the empty case. So we should have set up our test first if we're going to do TDD properly, but we can still test it. So consistency when there are no records, consistency when there are records, so let's grab our no records person, consistency, and we expect the result of this to be nil. So if we run this, it does not pass because it somehow has rows for this user. Okay, so let's do a by bug inside the code and run it again. So result dot rows so somehow we are getting back nil and nil. That's interesting. Okay, let's go back to our query and let's use a user ID that does not exist. So user ID of 1. Well, I think that user doesn't exist. Let's make sure. Oh. Where ID equals 1. Okay, that user does exist. Let's do 10. So we get nothing. So user 1 would have worked here because they didn't have any records, but so we get back a bunch of nulls. And then when we run this entire thing, we get 2 nulls back, which makes sense. Okay, so we could either try and change this output, or we can just check for this better in our code. So we're kind of doing TDD because we have a failing test. Okay, so we should really always expect to get back some rows here. So we want to do instead, so let's grab, let's call this row. Yeah, let's just get this. And there's a Ruby method, is it compact, that removes nil? Yeah, so we can compact the result and then do the count of that. And so if once we compact the count is 0, then we don't actually have anything. So we can do rows.first.compact.count. I guess we could just keep this variable. So let's grab row, compact.count is greater than 0. Then this should give us the nil we want. Okay, so that works. And then the other way, instead of doing assert equal nil, you can just say refute result. Okay, so that one passes. Now let's do our example with records. So call consistency. We expect our data to be best of something and worst of something. So let's run that. So we expected our best to be physical, our worst to be personal. So let's open our records, our seed data, and check. So we've got 2 physical, 1 mental, 1 existential, 1 relational, 2 financial tied again, personal 0, career is 1. So yeah, it looks like we tie physical and financial, and then personal is the worst. So that makes sense. Is it personal or relational? I think it's personal. Okay, so both those pass. Similar pattern as before. It's a big query, but it works. Okay, so now let's put this on our dashboard. So let's open the dashboard controller to get this data. Call it consistency. Now let's open the dashboard index. Let's say most consistent. This is consistency and then best. Least consistent and worst. So it should show physical and yeah, okay, so we're using a different user. We're using our test user, but this does correlate with what we saw over here. Mental being our best, physical being the worst. Okay, so let's go ahead and commit that. So we added this new function. Got some extra white space down there I'll take away. Tested it, put it on the dashboard. So most least consistency logic for the dashboard. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is I want to do this quote section right here. Now there's a couple ways we can do this. We could just have a hard-coded list. So this would be a bad place to put this, but we could have like quotes, which is an array of stuff. We could do that. We could also make a new model for it, which I think is what I'm going to do, so that way you can just load them in the database, and then we'll just pull one randomly every time. So what we need here is we need the text, we need the name of the person, and then I have this little external link So if there's an external resource we can point it towards, like if it was a tweet or something like that, then we can send them off to the source. So with that in mind, let's do a new model. So Rails G model, and let's call this quote. Let's give it a name, which is a string by default. So you can't specify the column here, but these are all strings, so we can just say name, text. Let's call it external URL. And I think that's all we need. So we'll generate that new model. Let's make these null false. We have to have a name, have to have the text. We don't have to have the URL. And then let's migrate. So that's a shortcut for me for RailsDB migrate. And so now we have our quotes. Let's go into our C data and let's go ahead and make a quote. So we can do quote.destroyAll, and then quote.create. Let's do name. Let's just use this one that I have here, which I took from Twitter. Text. If I can copy this. And then external URL. Let's just grab one of his. I really like this guy on his he's really good habit and kind of life stuff. Yeah, let's just grab one of these. This is not the same one, but it'll work. External URL. Okay, let's just grab two of his. So let's grab this one. Let's make another quote. Could also just maybe embed these things, but we'll just go with the text for now. Okay, so why do I have three of these? Just copied it twice. Okay, so here's our quote. And let's do Rails DB seed. And then reload. It does change our data a little bit since the seed data is random. But now if we go to our console and we do reload, we do quote.all. So we've now got two of those. So what we can do is we can do so if I have these as an array, so if I do quote.all to array and then I do sample, I can get a different quote every time. So here, like I grabbed the second one, here I got the first one. But I think there's an active record way to do this. Order by random. So let's try this query. So select star from records. Let's just do quotes since we have that. Order by random. Limit 1. So what is the Postgres random function? So it's just random spelled out. Okay, yeah, so now if we query this, we see that it is changing down here from ID 1 to ID 2 randomly, so that's what we want. So going back to our code, let's just do this in the console. So we should be able to do quote where, and then I'll just pass in a SQL string in here. Let's do order. So let's do order, random, and then limit 1. Can I do it like that? So order random, limit 1. There we go. Okay, so now ran it twice. I got ID 2 and then ID 1. So this is just going to randomly pull out one of these quotes, and then I need to do dot first, because right here we're in an active record relation, which is like an array that has extra attributes and methods. So I'll just get the first one. So that's what we need right there. So let's go to our dashboard controller. So let's open our quote model. For now, let's just put this in here. So let's say quote using a class method. Let's do random quote. And then we can just say, since we're already in the quote method, we can just say order limit 1 first. So let's get our quote. Say quote.random quote. And then let's go to our index page and put that on the page. So our quote for this day, or for this load, will be at quote.name. So let's do text, and then external URL. And for one of our seed datas for the quotes, let's take away the URL just to represent the case that we don't always have it. So let's do that. Let's go and run our Rails seed again. Let's make this split screen. Okay, so here, if we refresh, we should somewhat randomly alternate between these two quotes, which we do. Okay. Cool. So now let's commit that. So we added a quotes model. We got a random one. Add quotes model or quote model and get a random one for the dashboard. And then push that up. Okay, that's where I'll leave it for this one. The next time, I think we'll start getting into styling, which I'm very excited about because I'm tired of this looking so terrible. And once it's styled, I think we can push it up after that and then start using it. And then I think as I start to use it, and anyone, if you're watching, obviously you'll see where the Heroku app is, and so you can sign up as well if you want. And once we start using it, I think we'll see more about what it's missing or what behavior needs to be changed. And so if you have any questions or comments, or if you see my bad SQL and you know a way to fix it, let me know here in the video, on the comments below, or just hit me up on Twitter. I'll see you next time. Thanks.